Hello, I'm Rick Robinson, your District 2 Council member, and welcome to our second installment of Oceanside De-Mystified. I hope you had a chance to view the first show and maybe gain some knowledge about your city that you did not know. I learned so much in the show-making process and have to thank KOCT for their professionalism and work to make the first show as good as it could be. As I promised last time, no more of just listening to me. Today, I'm honored that my first in-studio guest is someone for whom I have great respect. I am proud to call him a friend and colleague. With us today is our Police Chief, Fred Armijo. By the time this program airs, Chief Armijo will be retired. After more than 33 years in law enforcement, Chief Armijo will turn over the reins to a new police chief. I had hoped that the new chief would have been appointed before our taping so that we could have included our new chief in this discussion. However, things didn't line up, so we will have the new chief at a future taping. With that, let me introduce you to our police chief, Fred Armijo. Fred, hi, thank you for being here today, and I want to start off by just congratulating you on your upcoming retirement.
Well, thank you. It's an honor to be your very first guest.
Thank you, and I appreciate you being here. But the first question I want to start with is, why retirement? Why now?
Well, I guess why not? So to back that up a little bit, my plan had been to retire at 50, and I really didn't anticipate this opportunity coming up. And when it did, I couldn't not try for it, right? It would make no sense to go this far into my career in this profession and have that opportunity in the community that I grew up with to try for this job. And so I did. Fortunately, I was selected. But part of what I knew going into this job was that I needed to maintain a certain pace because we had a lot of work to do within the organization to kind of reset and get things on, a much better path going forward. And the pacing takes quite a bit of energy. So I knew that I was in like that 2 to 3 year window, and my role was a transitional chief. My job was to get the department ready for that next person. And it took a lot of work. And it's like, as you know, you've led an organization before. There's a little bit of a dog year aspect right. to the professions that we've been in, right? And so I felt over the years that I needed to give a little bit back to my family because far too often during my career, I put job over family. Sure. And it's long past time to kind of try to make up for that. And my wife retired back in September. So I leave home every morning.
She was in law enforcement as well.
She was a forensics technician. And so, she's been done with her career for about 6 months or so. And so, I'm trying to get things situated, like I said, and then, you leave every morning and your spouse is not having to get up to go to work. She's able to right. do other things that she had been looking forward to. And so there's a draw for that too. It's like, hey, I want that too. And honestly, we have a great leadership team in the department.
Well, we're going to talk more about that in a second here. I want people to get to know a little bit about you. I know you're a Oceanside original. Can you tell me, tell our audience just a little bit about you and growing up here in Oceanside?
Yeah, so born and raised here, a product of the military in the sense that my father was a Marine. My mother was the daughter of a Marine, and so the Marine Corps brought both families here. And I spent a lot of my time through elementary school back and forth between Oceanside and 29 Palms because my dad was right. stationed back and forth. So I feel like I have this connection to the desert, the 29 Palms Joshua Tree space. And I bounced back and forth a lot with schools over the years. So my elementary school in Oceanside no longer exists. It was San Rafael, located near the front gate. I was at Jefferson it was junior high back then, for
Right.
7th grade, Lincoln, 8th grade, El Camino, 9th grade, and then I finished high school at OHS, and I graduated there in 89. That same year, I started working for the city as a lifeguard. And then a handful of years later, I transitioned over to the police department. And you can imagine, just in terms of like even the last 10 years, all of the changes that have happened in our city. But going back from just as a kid, it's so different. And I think different in a real good way. I was a baseball player. That was my passion. And
What position did you play?
third base.
Okay.
But I was a little bit of a utility player. I did some pitching, some catching, some middle infield, but third base was my home. And my plan had been, I'm going to go play in the major leagues, and then I'm going to be Magnum PI after that. And none of that worked. And so this opportunity came up while I was lifeguarding. I'd never had any clue that I was going to get into this profession. Whereas some people, it's like a lifelong dream.
Right.
Mine wasn't that way. It was a little bit different path.
Yeah. Well, I want to talk to you a little bit about law enforcement in general, because part of our theme here is to talk about some of those mysteries that
Sure.
happen here in the city. But what would you say is the biggest change that you've seen in the city?
So in terms of violent crime, it's dropped off dramatically. Now, in the last year, it started to tick back up. But for example, in 1995, we had 28 murders in our city. And last year we had 8, but the 3 years prior to that, we were averaging 5. So that's been a huge change for the good. And in fact, the interesting dichotomy of just life safety issues in our city is that tragically more people are dying on our roadways due to DUIs, distracted driving, pedestrians in places that they probably shouldn't be, then people are getting murdered. So in one hand, the dramatic turn in the murder rate is outstanding for our city, but we do have a lot of work when it comes to having safe roadways, and that's been a big change.
Mm-hmm.
Our city has a history of being plagued with gang violence, and there was a period of about 15 years ago where we were having close to 60 gang-motivated violent crimes in a year. And up until last year, we were hovering between like 17 and 19. And that's how far down gang crime had gone. And plus, gang membership throughout the city had gone from a height of close to 1,200 down to less than 300. So those are really significant changes in terms of the things that law enforcement has been faced to deal with in our city.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the OPD, Oceanside Police Department, and tell our audience anyways, how's it structured? How,
Sure.
Number of employees, just those kind of general things that people may not know.
Yeah, so you can think of and this is the same thing for the fire department, you can think of these departments as individual corporations. Like the police department is about a $70+ million a year corporation, and it's structured similarly. How we're organized is it's at 3 major divisions. So the heart and soul of law enforcement is patrol work. So we have a patrol division that's budgeted for about 91 police officers, 12 sergeants, and then part of patrol is our communication center. And so we have a dispatch manager, 4 dispatch supervisors, and we're budgeted for about 24 dispatchers and call takers. And so that's all one division. And actually our front desk personnel fall under there as well. And then we have another division that we refer to as support operations. And the easiest way to describe this is that it's really everybody who's not in patrol but still wears a uniform falls under this division. So you can think of our school resource officers, our homeless outreach team, our harbor, beaches, and downtown officers, our neighborhood policing team, the motor unit and the traffic investigative unit, our crime suppression team. It's a collection of specialized uniform assignments, and that's comprised of about another 45 or so police officers, a handful of sergeants, a couple of lieutenants. And when I've described these divisions, they're each headed by a police captain. The third division is our investigations division, and that also includes records as well as our evidence and property unit. That's another 60 to 70 employees with a combination of what we refer to as sworn supervisors and sworn officers, as well as professional staff, which are the dispatchers, the forensics technicians, the evidence and property technicians, our records staff. So within investigations, we also have a captain. We have 2 lieutenants. We have a civilian version of a lieutenant, and then both sworn and professional staff supervisors underneath them. And then the fourth element's not necessarily a division, but it's what we refer to as the Office of the Chief of Police. And that comprises our training management, our professional standards unit, the element that is involved in hiring and conducting backgrounds, or at least overseeing backgrounds, and the testing process for all of our positions, as well as our financial services unit. And so that expanded chief's office is comprised of a yet-to-be-named assistant police chief, 1 lieutenant who oversees professional standards. And professional standards is a more contemporary name for internal affairs. Right. And there's 2 sergeants and a lieutenant that are in that group. And then we have another lieutenant that oversees all of our training, our hiring, and new hire testing, overseeing the backgrounds process, who's supported by a sergeant and an officer. And then within that financial services unit space, we have a principal management analyst supported by 3 program specialists and 1 program specialist and a senior office specialist. And we have other support staff that are assigned to help out in that training function. So we are a department that's authorized for nearly 350 employees. We're hovering probably around 310-ish because we struggle with hiring at all levels. It's a huge challenge for us.
So I just wanted to address that before we go to our next topic. And I know having the vacancies, and it's not just your department in the city, right. All departments are kind of struggling a little bit. But it sounds like there's opportunity for people to go into law enforcement. They don't have to be the frontline police officer. Right. There's a lot of opportunities. What do you say to people that say, I think I want to be in law enforcement?
Sure. So I'll start by describing a program that we implemented through Measure X funding, which for those not familiar with Measure X, it's a half-cent sales tax initiative that was approved by the voters a handful of years ago. And so with that funding, we have tremendously increased the number of community services officers. And it's a limited term because it's tied to Measure X, right. which sunsets in a couple of years. But the goal of this program was to get people into this sort of apprenticeship position within the organization and then expose them to all of the different career paths that we have available, knowing that ultimately this is the equivalent of our farm team for a Major League Baseball team. We want to grow these positions into future police officers, dispatchers, technicians, analysts. So that is a great, hey, I have an interest in law enforcement, not sure exactly what I want to do. Come try this position with us, and we'll expose you to all these different career paths. And trust me, you're going to find one that you love. And that is also another attempt on our part to fill positions, because just trying to fill things based on contemporary recruitment strategies wasn't working for us. So we had to do a shift to try to grow our own future employees. This community services officer position, it's entry level, but it's full-time work. It's fully benefited. and you need a driver's license and the equivalent of a high school diploma and good character. We'll train you for the specific tasks. So we're looking for people with character. And then we've been placing a lot of emphasis on what we've termed as our homegrown initiative.
Thank you.
So there's about 47 members of our police department that lived in Oceanside when they graduated high school. So everybody in this group has an athletic jersey from their high school with their year of graduation on it, and then their title on the back. The idea is I want kids that are approaching 18, that are, or maybe even a little bit younger, to start seeing themselves in us. And maybe that will spark another level of interest in them to try us out. And I really want to increase the number of people that grew up here coming into the organization, because I think it also helps to have that be another way of extending our reach into the community. One thing that I think people may not realize, especially when in terms of being a police officer, is that you can do a 30-year career and have 10 mini careers in there, as an example.
Right.
So you can be a detective, but even within the detective ranks, you can specialize in property crimes. You can specialize in family protection-oriented crimes. You can specialize in homicide. You can specialize in gangs or vice and narcotics. And that's just the detective side. You can do a number of years as a motorcycle officer and then maybe go work on our downtown Harbor and Beach unit.
Right.
So the number of career opportunities, and that's just on the sworn side. We have similar paths
Right.
On the professional staff side. So lots of opportunities.
And I know you and I could talk about, because we had the same vision kind of in the fire department with our
Right.
AMT program and stuff. But when you were talking to me about it, I got thinking, what about that young man or woman that maybe in high school and they think, oh, I can't get on because my grades might not have been good enough, or they had a run-in with their officer at their campus, or,
Sure.
Should they still try if they're interested?
Absolutely. So here's something that I really want people to consider, is that when you look at the police department, we're human beings. We hire from the human race, right? So there is no person that has an immaculate background. We've all done things in our lives that if we could rewind the clock, we would do differently. And we recognize that. But the important thing is that people can demonstrate that they've learned and grown from whatever that experience was. Now, clearly in our profession, there are certain things that are going to rule people out. But there are definitely lots of opportunities for people who, maybe they did something foolish, but, you grow from it.
Well, I know the clock's going faster than we have time here. So one of the things I wanted to talk about were some of those little mystery things. And so I'm going to ask you for some brief, quick responses, if
Sure.
you can, to some of these. I know some of them are tough. When somebody calls 911, what happens?
So right away, the call taker is starting to gather information. And the thing that I think many people don't realize is that, yes, there's a lot of questions, but we need information to make informed decisions, to be able to classify an incident to the appropriate priority, to make sure we're gathering all of the information that's going to help an officer be successful on that scene. It doesn't mean that as more and more questions are being asked, that officers aren't already on the way for a 911 related call. But in that moment, it's chaos, right? For somebody to have to call 911, something bad has happened. And so, for instance, we talk about this. When a critical incident is happening and somebody is experiencing some kind of crisis, seconds are going to seem like minutes, but in reality, they are seconds. So that dispatcher who's gathering this information, they're inputting all of the information that they're getting from that caller into what we call a computer-aided dispatch, into CAD. And at various intervals of them receiving information, it gets sent over to an actual radio dispatcher who will then be communicating with the officers and sending them to the call. And then as more and more information is gained, then we update the officers over the radio and via computer. You can imagine a 911 call. A lot of the information is going to be conveyed via radio because you've got to focus on getting there as quickly as possible. You can't be looking at your computer screens for intel.
Most of us, many people never ever get pulled over by a cop, and when you see those lights come up behind you, just what's the right thing to do?
Well, you want to pull over in a safe location. You don't want to pull to the left and be in the center of the roadway. Find a space off to the right. As the officer's going to approach, the officer's not going to have any real idea of who's in the car. So they're going to be on a little bit higher alert for their own safety, and they're going to ask some questions. The more routine nature when it comes to a traffic stop is the officer's going to want to see a driver's license, registration, proof of insurance, and there's going to be some discussion as to the reason for the stop. And it's always super helpful for a level of cooperation that can help to maintain things at a level where dialogue can truly be exchanged, heard, and understood. And not every situation has to end in something that's truly negative. There are definitely times where it's a conversation. It's like, hey, I saw you make that turn. You cut this other person off. We're really trying to focus on traffic safety in our city, and so I apologize, but I'm going to have to issue a citation for that. Or it could be that because officers have discretion, it could be that in the moment, whatever that person might say as an explanation might generate a decision from that officer to just ask them to drive safer and be given a warning. But we would much prefer for people to be calm. It's okay to ask questions. But the officer, at the end of the day, especially in our city, we're trying to make our roads safer, and many times there's really, I don't believe, a need to elevate a situation, and we have to own that as well.
Yeah. So talking about traffic officers or motor officers, I hear it all the time that cops have quotas on tickets. How many tickets do your officers have to write?
As many as they can. No, so when it comes to motorcycle officers, you have to understand that that's their mission, is to address problem traffic areas in our city, and that's the tool that they have, issuing citations. What I don't want is for police officers to not be engaged in work, right? So if I have a police officer who's doing nothing but being parked behind a grocery store, as an example, what good are they doing for the community? So they need to be out there, they need to be active. And for instance, we kind of keep on this traffic focus. If we know that we have a number of stop sign violations in a certain area and they're in between calls for service, I want them over there working that. It doesn't mean that they have to write X number of citations, but they better be having conversations with people to try to change behavior at the very least.
Thank you. And I was going to talk a little bit about arrests and what happens, but I don't think we have time to get into all that. But if you briefly, when somebody gets arrested, we've all seen TV shows and it says, oh, you get a phone call or an attorney. How does that work that way? Does that happen at OPD when you get arrested, or does it happen when you get booked into jail, or just?
So our more frequent common practice is when we arrest somebody and it's for an offense that they can be booked into jail, we take them over to Vista Jail, and that's where they technically get booked. And state law requires 3 phone calls to be granted to that person within 3 hours of their booking.
Okay.
So. And I don't think the jail limits them to 3 necessarily. It's usually there's a phone tank and they have a period of time where they can spend making whatever phone calls that they need to.
In the time we have left, I really want to talk about community policing. And sure. I know that's a big issue here in the city. Just talk about your vision on community policing and what you want to leave behind.
Well, I think it's important to address the history of community policing in our city, because there's been there's been some mischaracterization of community policing, and some of that there's been an assertion that community policing didn't exist until Officer Dan Besant was killed. And that's absolutely not true. First of all, Officer Dan Besant was murdered while engaged in community policing.
Right.
So when I started this job as a sworn police officer in 1994, we had an element called the Neighborhood Enhancement Team. That was our frontline entity for community policing. And I worked that unit for a couple of years. That transitioned into what we called neighborhood corporals, which transitioned into what we call neighborhood policing in today's terms. And Dan was a member of neighborhood policing. And it's really about trying to improve quality of life, more specifically in neighborhoods, but really in any element of the city, working with residents to try to address problems that may not be high felonious type of incidents, but nevertheless, they have a high impact on quality of life. And what has the only limiting factor that we have in that space, starting in about 2015, is we continue to struggle with staffing. And so we spread out our vacancies throughout the organization, and there's limited capacity to do everything. And so are we as engaged on that community policing front and being as active in resource centers as we were prior to then? No. But that's why we need to continue to work on filling our positions. But the concept of community policing has not gone away in the police department. It has not sunsetted, and it's kind of a ridiculous notion, quite frankly, to even assert that.
Well, thank you for that. I'm glad we had a chance to talk about it. And again, time doesn't let us get into all the questions and the things I'd hoped to. But I kind of like to wrap up with this one point. And as we're producing this video, your replacements are being interviewed today. And can you just kind of close up for us with a little bit about why you believe your replacement is best picked from internal? This is an internal-only recruitment. We didn't go to the outside. And then if you would, just kind of close up with any messages or thoughts you have as you wrap up your career here and what you're going to miss.
Right. There are certainly times and conditions in which somebody from outside of an organization would be the right decision to make. We're definitely not in that time. We have an outstanding crew of leaders who are invested in our community. They've been doing this profession for decades, and they're already positioned to take my seat. And so instead of trying to do this process where you bring in somebody who has no connection to our community, that's going to have to build those connections and figure out the organization, there's no need for that. We have a system right now where I can hand off the organization to any one of 3 candidates. And the bench of leaders in our organization is so strong and so committed. That's my thoughts on that particular process. Now, messaging. I have 3 expectations for people in our organization, and I think you can use this in any profession. The first is work hard. Our community deserves people that are out there working hard for them, not hiding behind some grocery store somewhere, but actively engaged in trying to improve quality of life. The second is be nice. We can use a lot more of just being nice, not in terms of how we interact necessarily with the community, but even internally. The people sitting next to you in briefing. And the last thing is changing lives. There are opportunities every day where we can change somebody's trajectory in life. And sometimes all that is letting someone else know that you give a damn. So if you're working hard, you're being nice, you're going to be out there changing lives. And that's the expectations that we've set for people in our organization. And I'm telling you, they're living up to it every day.
Well, thank you for that. And I think in your career, you've modeled all those things. I've seen them as the former fire chief here. I've had a chance to work with you in many different capacities. And I would just say that also as a citizen, I've lived in the city here for 34 years. And I want to personally thank you for everything you've given to this city, and for your caring for our residents. And I wish you the very, very best in your retirement. And is there anything that you want to close with or add, or is there some mystery that we didn't talk about that you want to make sure our folks know about?
I don't think there's any mysteries. I consider myself a pretty open book. You know, I'm looking forward to whatever the next chapter brings. I've talked openly about learning how to play the piano, drums, and guitar. I know that my mind needs to stay exercised, and I'm going to be engaged in doing all kinds of stuff that's not the same as what I've been doing.
Well, thank you very much, and appreciate you being my first guest on Oceanside Demystified.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you for joining us today. I know all of us wish Chief Armijo the very best in his well-deserved retirement. If you have comments, questions, or suggestions for guests, let me know by texting 760-216-7587 or go to our website, osided2.com. Remember, Oceanside is a great place to live, work, and play. Don't let it be a mystery. Until next time, I'm your council member, Rick Robinson. Thanks for watching.